So this is what a liar looks like up close. My brother's voice cut through the oak-paneled conference room like a blade. He said it quietly, almost conversationally, the way you'd comment on the weather. But the microphone on the table picked up every word and carried it to every corner of the room. 12 members of the Hargrove Family Trust Board sat in their leather chairs, and every single one of them turned to look at me. Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his custom Oxford shirt, a smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. His wife, Renata, a corporate attorney with a Georgetown law degree and a talent for making people feel small, set a manila folder on the polished mahogany table. She didn't open it. She just placed her manicured hand flat on top of it, the way a dealer lays down cards before they show you the hand that ruins your night. My sister has been claiming a combat deployment bonus under our father's estate clause, Marcus said, letting his eyes sweep the room before landing back on me. But we all know there was no deployment, don't we, Jade? My name. He used my name like a period at the end of a sentence that already had its verdict. My name is Jade Hargrove. I'm 27 years old. I am a first lieutenant in the United States Army, military intelligence. I have spent the last 3 years operating in environments that don't appear on any tourist map. And I was sitting in a law firm's 12th floor conference room in Charleston, South Carolina, wearing a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, watching my older brother try to erase every single one of those years in front of the people who held our father's estate in their hands. Let me tell you how his 14-minute performance became the worst mistake of his life. The reading of my father's will had been scheduled for 11 in the morning. I had flown in from Fort Campbell the night before, still carrying the particular exhaustion that settles deep in your bones after a long rotation, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I had worn civilian clothes deliberately. No uniform, no ribbons. I didn't come to impress anyone. I came because my father's attorney, a quiet man named Gerald Oakes, had called me 2 weeks prior and told me I needed to be present. I had arrived 8 minutes early. Marcus and Renata were already seated. Marcus didn't stand when I walked in. He didn't shake my hand. He watched me cross the room the way a cat watches something small move through the grass. Renata didn't look up from her phone. My cousin Danny was already there too, seated near the wall, away from the main table. She was the only person in that room who gave me a small, uncertain smile when I sat down. Not a confident smile. An apologetic one. The kind that says, I know what's coming, and I'm sorry I can't stop it. I noticed it. I filed it away. Gerald read the will slowly and methodically, the way careful lawyers always do. When he reached the estate clause, the one my grandfather had originally written to reward military service, and which my father had preserved and amended, Marcus uncapped his pen. He waited exactly 4 seconds after Gerald finished reading the clause aloud. Then he said my name. Jade. Just that. He let the room get quiet first. A seasoned performer, my brother. He learned it from our mother, who had spent 30 years running the board of a hospital network and who believed deeply in the power of the dramatic pause. Marcus inherited the talent without inheriting the integrity that usually goes with it. There's a problem with the deployment documentation you submitted, Marcus said. He nodded once to Renata. She opened the folder. Inside was a 2-page report prepared by someone named Dr. Carl Whitfield, described in the header as a military records consultant. I didn't know what a military records consultant was, because that isn't a real thing. But the board members didn't know that. Renata stood up. She was tall, precise, deliberate in every movement. She placed a copy of the report in front of each board member with the efficiency of a woman who billed $600 an hour and intended every minute to count. Dr. Whitfield reviewed the deployment records your sister submitted, Renata said, addressing the board rather than me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had somehow wandered into the wrong room. His conclusion is that the dates in her military file contain significant irregularities. The deployment window she claimed, which would trigger the estate's combat service clause, does not align with Army records for her stated unit. A board member named Frank Aldridge, my father's oldest friend, leaned forward over his copy. He was 71 years old, a retired federal judge, and he had known me since I was 4 years old and could barely reach the kitchen counter. He frowned at the paper. He didn't look at me. I felt something cold move through my chest. Not fear, something older and quieter than fear. Fury at a temperature that burns cold instead of hot. This is false, I said. I kept my voice level, flat and absolute. I said it the way you state coordinates. No decoration. No emotion in the delivery. Just the fact. dropped into the center of the room. Marcus smiled. He had been waiting for that. "Of course you'd say that," he said. He turned his chair slightly, angling his body toward the board and away from me, a subtle physical move that telegraphed, "I'm speaking to the adults now. Jade, nobody in this room doubts that you joined the army. We're not disputing that. What we're disputing is the specific claim of a combat deployment, which under Dad's clause would double your share of the estate." He paused. "Double, ladies and gentlemen." He repeated the word like he was teaching arithmetic to slow students. "We're talking about a difference of $4.3 million. He let that number sit. The air in the room changed. I felt it. Money does that. In rooms like this, it thickens the air, slows people's thinking, makes them reach for caution instead of principle. "Jade has always had a vivid imagination," Marcus said, and his voice softened into something that was almost gentle, which was somehow worse. "When we were kids, she used to tell the neighbors she was going to be an astronaut, a spy, a Navy SEAL." He shook his head with the specific fondness of a man pretending to be sad about something he's actually enjoying enormously. "I think some part of her never stopped believing her own stories." One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Chen, who ran a shipping logistics company and had the practiced neutrality of someone who had survived 30 years of boardrooms, said nothing. But I watched her hand move slowly away from her coffee cup. She was pulling back. She was retreating from me before the case was even made. I knew what was happening. I had been briefed on enough intelligence assessments to recognize the structure of a well-executed influence operation when I was sitting inside one. Marcus and Renata had prepared this. They had rehearsed it. The fake consultant, the pre-distributed report, the number 4.3 million, dropped at exactly the right moment to hijack the board's risk assessment. They had built the architecture of doubt before I walked through the door. "May I speak?" I said. "You'll have your opportunity," Renata said smoothly without looking at me. "We're not finished." She wasn't done. Of course she wasn't done. Renata reached back into the folder. She produced a second document and set it in the center of the table. "Additionally," she said, "we've obtained a signed statement from a former member of Jade's stated unit claiming that her described role during the relevant period was administrative, stateside. She was processing intelligence reports at Fort Campbell, not deployed overseas. That one landed differently. That one had a name attached to it, a name I recognized when I leaned forward to read it. A sergeant who had washed out of the unit before the deployment. A man who had reasons to be angry that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own failed evaluation. A man who had apparently found my brother's money more persuasive than his own memory." My jaw tightened. My back teeth found each other and held. I had been in Kandahar when that man was back at Fort Campbell filing a grievance. I breathed in slowly through my nose. I pushed the air down into my diaphragm. My hands rested on the table in front of me, perfectly still. I was not going to give this room the satisfaction of watching me lose my composure over a lie told by a man who hadn't earned his. 14 minutes, I said quietly. Marcus looked up. "Excuse me? You said you needed 14 minutes of the board's time." I looked at my watch. "You have 9 left. Use them." His smile flickered, just briefly. Something shifted behind his eyes, a small recalibration, the way a man adjusts when the door he expected to be unlocked turns out to be deadbolted. He hadn't expected stillness. He had expected me to argue, to defend, to produce documents, and get flustered when he challenged them. He had built his entire performance around breaking my composure and using my reaction to prove his point. I gave him nothing. But across the room, near the wall, I watched Danny quietly set her coffee down. She reached into her purse. She pulled out her phone. She looked at me once quick, barely a glance, and then she looked away. I hadn't asked her to do anything. I hadn't made a signal. We hadn't spoken since I sat down. But Danny had grown up military. Her father, my Uncle Roy, had served 2 tours in the Gulf. She knew what she was looking at. She knew the difference between someone being defensive and someone being patient. She was already typing. Marcus spent the remaining 9 minutes building the portrait of a woman who had inflated her service record to access family money. He was good at it. He used language like, "We have to be honest with ourselves," and "This is painful for me to say," and "I love my sister," which is exactly why I can't stay silent. He cited the consultant's report 3 more times. Renata interjected twice with legal citations that sounded authoritative and were designed to imply that filing false military documentation with a civilian estate was potentially criminal. She used the word fraud twice. The second time, she looked directly at Frank Aldridge. Frank looked down at the table. I watched my father's oldest friend, the man who had carried my dad's casket 6 weeks ago, quietly distance himself from me without saying a word, and I understood something in that moment that I had only intellectually understood before. The truth does not protect you from a well-constructed lie. Not immediately, not in a room like this one, where comfort and money are in alignment, and I was the only variable creating friction. Marcus finished. He straightened his cuffs. He looked at Gerald Oakes. We'd like the board to table any decisions regarding the combat service clause pending an independent third-party review of Jade's military records. He said it calmly, like a man asking for a menu substitution. That's all we're asking. A simple verification process. Surely that's reasonable. Several board members nodded. The word reasonable had done its work. Gerald cleared his throat. He looked at me. Miss Hargrove, do you have a response at this time? I looked at Marcus. I looked at Renata. I looked at Frank Aldridge, who was still studying the grain of the mahogany table. Yes, I said. I folded my hands. I'll wait. Marcus's brow creased. Wait for what? I didn't answer him. What Marcus didn't see, because Marcus had spent his entire career in real estate and had never once been in an environment where the information you don't have is more dangerous than the information you do, was the corner of the room where my cousin Danny was no longer on her phone. She had already made the call. Danny's father, my Uncle Roy, had spent 22 years in the Army before he retired as a sergeant major. He still attended the same monthly breakfast at the VFW post in North Charleston that he had attended for the last 11 years. And at that breakfast, every single month, sat a man named Colonel Richard Vasquez, retired, now a senior advisor to the DoD Inspector General's office. With the kind of clearance and the kind of institutional reach that civilian attorneys don't encounter in their normal professional lives. Roy and Vasquez had served together in '04. Roy had carried Vasquez out of a burning vehicle outside Fallujah. That was the kind of debt that doesn't expire. Danny had texted her father 6 words. They're lying about Jade. Right now. Roy had read that text at 11:09 a.m. while sitting 3 blocks away at a coffee shop, waiting for the reading to finish so he could take me to lunch. He had put down his cup. He had called Vasquez before his cup stopped steaming. And Vasquez, who knew my file because he had personally authorized 2 of my commendations, had picked up on the first ring. The conference room had the kind of silence that expensive rooms manufacture. Soft HVAC hum. The distant murmur of the city 12 floors below. The quiet scratch of Gerald Oakes's pen as he made notes. Marcus had moved on to discussing logistics. He was suggesting a timeline for the independent review. He was being very magnanimous about it, very patient, very reasonable, the way a man is reasonable when he's already certain of the outcome. Renata was recapping her legal citations for Frank Aldridge's benefit. Neither of them was paying attention to the door. The receptionist knocked twice. She opened it without waiting for an answer, which told me she had been told not to wait. She stepped aside. Colonel Richard Vasquez did not fill a room the way movie generals do. He was 61 years old, compact, unremarkable, in a gray suit, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He had a face that looked like it had been subjected to a great deal of weather and had decided not to be bothered by it anymore. He walked to the center of the room and stood without sitting down, because a man like Vasquez operates by his own invitation schedule. He looked at Gerald Oakes. Are you the estate attorney? Gerald stood up halfway, instinctively. I am. Gerald Oakes. Colonel Richard Vasquez, retired, currently serving as senior advisor to the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. He set his portfolio on the table. He opened it. I understand there's been a question raised today about First Lieutenant Jade Hargrove's military service documentation. The room had gone very still. Who are you? Marcus said. He kept his voice steady, but I could hear the slight tightening in it, the way a rope sounds when it starts to take weight it wasn't expecting. Vasquez looked at Marcus the way a man looks at a road sign, briefly, for orientation purposes, with no particular feeling about it. I'm the person who signed her deployment authorization. He turned back to Gerald. May I? Gerald gestured toward the center of the table with one hand. His other hand was still holding his pen, suspended in mid-air, frozen by the particular stillness of a man watching the entire shape of a situation rearrange itself in front of him. Vasquez opened the portfolio. He placed 3 documents on the table. He didn't narrate them. He didn't perform. He simply laid them flat and stepped back so the board members could see. The first was a certified copy of my deployment orders, issued by the Department of the Army, date-stamped, countersigned, bearing a document control number that tied directly to the DoD record system. The second was my official service record summary, pulled that morning from the Army Human Resources Command database, deployment dates, unit designation, theater of operations. The third was a letter. It was printed on DoD letterhead and bore the signature of Brigadier General Sandra Ellison, Commanding General of the 66th Military Intelligence Brigade. I hadn't known that letter existed until that moment. I didn't know that Sandra Ellison had written a single word on my behalf. I found out later from Danny that Vasquez had called Ellison directly, 40 minutes before he walked into that room. That Ellison had dictated the letter to her aide and had it transmitted and printed in under 20 minutes. That she had done it without being asked twice, because she knew my name, and she knew what I had done in Kandahar during a night operation 9 months ago that I am still not at liberty to describe in detail, except to say that 3 people came home because of decisions I made in a ditch in the dark, and General Ellison had been the one to pin the commendation on my uniform afterward, and she did not forget the people she pinned. Vasquez let the documents speak for approximately 15 seconds of silence. Then he said, "The report prepared by Dr. Carl Whitfield contains factual errors about Army deployment record formatting that are consistent with someone who has never had access to actual Army deployment records. The document control numbers he cited don't exist in any DoD database." He picked up Renata's copy of the consultant's report. He set it down on top of the other pile without ceremony. "I've already referred this to the Inspector General's office for review. Whoever prepared this document may want to retain counsel." Renata's face did not move. That was how I knew it had landed. A lawyer's face goes still when the information is bad. Renata's face became a mask so carefully neutral it looked sculpted. Marcus had stopped adjusting his cuffs. Vasquez turned. For the first time, he looked directly at me. His expression didn't change dramatically. But something in it shifted a slight weight, a gravity. The specific look of a man who has read a person's file and knows what the paper can't fully hold. "Lieutenant Hargrove," he said. I stood up. My spine locked straight. My heels came together. It was muscle memory, not performance. 27 years old or not, you don't half stand for a colonel. "Sir," I said. He gave me a single nod, precise, unhurried, the kind of nod that is its own full sentence. "I see you. I know what you are. This room does not." He looked at Frank Aldridge. "Sir, I understand you were a federal judge." Frank straightened slightly. "I was, yes, 31 years on the bench. Then you understand the difference between evidence and assertion." Vasquez tapped the 3 documents with 2 fingers. "Everything in her file is verified. Everything in that consultant's report is fabricated." He said both sentences at exactly the same volume and pace, which somehow made the second one hit harder. "I'll leave the copies with Mr. Oakes for the record." He closed his portfolio. He looked at no one else in the room. He walked to the door, and he left, and the soft mechanical click of the conference room door, closing behind him, was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The room was motionless. Marcus broke first. He always broke first. Even as kids, he couldn't stand silence. This is completely irregular," he said. He looked at Renata. Renata was looking at her folder. She was not going to save him. She was already calculating, I could see it in the set of her jaw, how to limit her own exposure. "Marcus," I said. He looked at me. And for the first time since I had walked into that room, since the reading had begun, since he had set this entire architecture in motion, he looked uncertain. Not scared, just uncertain. Which, for Marcus, was its own kind of loss. "I'm not going to fight you for the money," I said. Something flickered across his face. He hadn't expected that either. "Dad's clause exists because Grandpa believed that service deserves to be honored," I said. "Not leveraged, not used as a weapon in a conference room." I looked at the board. I looked at Frank Aldridge, who had finally lifted his eyes from the table. "I'm entitled to the double share. Colonel Vasquez just confirmed that in front of witnesses and a recording system." I nodded toward the small ceiling camera in the corner, standard in any professional law office, which Marcus and Renata had apparently not considered when they delivered their performance. But I didn't come here to take everything I could get from this family. I reached into my blazer pocket. I took out the folded piece of paper I had written the night before in my hotel room, because I had known not the specifics, but the shape of what Marcus was planning, and I had decided on the flight down from Fort Campbell what I was going to do if it came to this. I unfolded it and set it on the table. "That's a letter of direction to Gerald Oakes," I said. "My full inheritance, the standard share, not the doubled amount, goes into a trust for the children of service members killed in action, administered through the Gold Star Families Organization." I looked at Gerald, who was reading it with the focused expression of a man trying to determine if what he was seeing was real. The combat clause bonus, the additional share Marcus was so worried about, I'm not claiming it. I don't need it. And I don't want anything from this estate that comes with the condition of watching my brother look at me the way he did when he walked in this morning. The silence stretched. Patricia Chen, the logistics executive, who had pulled her hand away from her coffee cup, was the first board member to move. She leaned forward. She picked up Vasquez's document, the one with Ellison's letter on top, and she read it. Not skimmed it, read it. When she finished, she set it down. She looked at Marcus. Then she looked away. That was all. Frank Aldridge cleared his throat. He looked at me with the expression of a man carrying something heavier than usual. "Jade," he said. He stopped. He tried again. "Your father would have." He stopped a second time. "I know," I said. I picked up the gold pen from the center of the table, the estate's pen, the one with the firm's logo on it, the one that had been placed there for signatures. I signed my letter of direction. I signed it steadily, without hesitation, the way you do when the decision was made a long time before the pen was in your hand. I pushed back my chair. Danny was already standing near the door, her purse on her shoulder, waiting. She had known, before I did, that it was going to end this way. She had the same look her father always had at the end of a hard thing. Not relief exactly, but the particular quiet of someone who had done what they came to do. I crossed the room. I didn't rush. My heels were measured, and even on the tile floor. I stopped at the door. I looked back, once, at Marcus. He was still in his chair. The consultant's report was still in front of him, discredited and useless, and he was looking at the table the same way Frank Aldridge had been looking at it 20 minutes ago. Like there was something in the wood grain he was trying to read that might tell him where everything had gone wrong. I could have said something. There were things that wanted to be said. 14 years of things, accumulated and stored in the specific compartment where you keep the injuries that family gives you and that you can't fully explain to anyone outside the family. I didn't say any of them. I turned around. I walked through the door. Outside, the Charleston morning was bright and unreasonably warm for October, the sun sitting low and golden over the harbor 2 blocks away. A salt wind moved through the street. I stopped on the sidewalk and let it hit me. Danny came out behind me and stood next to me without saying anything for a moment, which is the correct thing to do. "Uncle Roy is at the coffee shop on Broad Street," she finally said. "He said he's buying." I exhaled. The tension I'd been holding since the night before, since the airplane, since the phone call from Gerald Oakes 2 weeks ago, came out in that one breath. Not all of it. Some things take longer than one afternoon to release. But enough. "Okay," I said. I started walking. The thing they don't understand, Marcus, Renata, the people who build their strategies around the assumption that they know more than you do about what you've been through, is that service changes what you're afraid of. Not in a dramatic way. Not the way movies show it. Just quietly, over time, through accumulated exposure to situations where the stakes are real and the margin for self-deception is zero. You stop being afraid of rooms. You stop being afraid of documents and consultants and men who learned how to sound authoritative in law school. You stop being afraid of having the wrong answer because you've been in places where there was no right answer and you had to find the edge of the next second and hold it anyway. What Marcus thought was arrogance, my stillness, my silence, my refusal to perform the breakdown he needed wasn't arrogance. It was the particular calm of someone who has already survived the thing they were most afraid of. Everything after that is just paperwork. If there's a family member out there who has dismissed what you've earned, who has used your quiet against you, who has decided that because you don't perform your accomplishments loudly enough, they must not be real, I want you to know something. The truth does not need your defense. It only needs time. Your job is to still be standing when the time runs out. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had someone try to rewrite your story right in front of you? Tell me what you did. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this is only the beginning.